My son told me I wasn't welcome at the family reunion, while unknowingly spending the money I gave to host it. I didn't argue. I just nodded, turned off my phone, and started collecting every receipt, every email, every piece of proof they thought I wouldn't keep. Then I walked into his office, calm as ever, and said, "Don't confuse silence with weakness." But that was only the beginning. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. The message came in while I was rinsing out my coffee cup. It was short. Too short. Just a few words from my son, Brant. "Dad, the reunion this year is mostly for the younger generation. Hope you understand." Understand. That word sat heavier than it should have. For a long minute, I stood still at the sink, water running over my fingers, cooling into something that stung. I didn't reply right away. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound needy or desperate, and I'd long promised myself I wouldn't beg for belonging, not even from my own son. I dried my hands, walked to the kitchen table, sat down slowly, and typed one word: understood. That was it. I set the phone down face up, as if it might change its mind and buzz with a follow-up. Maybe something softer, but no other messages came. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the house settling around me. The silence that followed wasn't unfamiliar, but this time it had shape. It pressed in around my shoulders, filled the spaces between the frames on the wall. Old reunion photos hung near the hallway, one with me holding the microphone, leading the family blessing. Another, Brant at 16, arms looped around my neck, grinning wide like he still trusted me with his world. I poured another cup of coffee out of habit, not need. Sat alone in the armchair by the window. Watched two squirrels argue over a branch like it mattered. The mug was warm between my palms, but the house felt colder than usual. Later, I checked my email. No threads about planning, no group invites. A forwarded document from my niece appeared. She probably assumed I was still involved. That's how I learned Brant had taken over as coordinator. Miles Jr. It read, that was his name on paper. But I'd always called him Brant. Gave him that nickname when he was barely 3, after an old Navy buddy. Strange how the things we give people, names, homes, legacies, get repackaged once we're no longer in the room. 25 years ago, I hosted the first Hoyt family reunion in our backyard, under a big white tent I rented with the last of that quarter's contract money. We grilled, we laughed, we told stories until the moon rose high over the tree line. Back then, it felt like laying bricks for something permanent. Something bigger than me. I'd given Brant more control in recent years. To modernize it, I told myself, to give him pride in continuing the tradition. Now I wondered if that handoff was a mistake. Still, I didn't call him. I knew that voice inside me that wanted answers, that wanted a reason, would only make things worse. I took my time walking out to the garden, pulled weeds slowly from the rose bed. A neighbor passing by waved and said, "Looking forward to the big gathering next week." I smiled, tight-lipped. It'll be something. Didn't have the heart to tell her I wouldn't be there. That I hadn't been asked. Evening settled in. I opened my file cabinet, looking for something else entirely, when the folder labeled Contributions caught my eye. Pulled it out. Inside, a receipt stared back at me. Dated 3 months ago. Event contribution, Hoyt Heritage, $12,000. My name, my account, my money. The paper crinkled slightly as my grip tightened. The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds as I stared at the open laptop. My banking portal blinked back at me, numbers lined up in crisp, cold rows. That contribution, $12,000, hadn't gone into some anonymous reunion fund. No, it had gone directly to an event coordination firm. Brant's firm. There it was in black and white, Hoyt Heritage, event support. Vendor, Hoyt Group Events, LLC. That LLC was registered under Brant's name. I'd signed the check thinking it would go toward catering, music, seating charts. Never imagining it would pay for my own erasure, I printed out the receipts. The printer whirred softly in the quiet house, each sheet sliding out as if reluctant to be seen. I stacked them slowly, lining the edges with care. These weren't just financial records, they were evidence. Of what, I wasn't entirely sure. Betrayal? Manipulation? Or just a new kind of forgetfulness? For a week straight, I checked the mailbox. Each morning. Each afternoon, just in case. But it stayed empty. No formal invitation, no casual note, not even one of those overly glossy flyers we used to design together. At the grocery store on Thursday, I ran into Janine, Brant's second cousin, I think, twice removed. She was picking out party cups and napkins, a bright reunion logo printed on each one. She smiled and said, "Can't wait to see everyone next Saturday, Daryl. It's going to be huge this year." Next Saturday. That's how I found out the date. I nodded, said something vague like, "Should be a good one," then turned away before my face betrayed me. She meant no harm, but it was strange, being erased so cleanly from something I had once helped build brick by brick. Back home, I reached out to Ivy, my niece, the only one in that side of the family who still sent holiday cards. I asked about the reunion, casually. She replied within minutes, cheerful as ever. "Sure thing, Uncle D. Sending you the flyer we got via email." A PDF slid into my inbox. I opened it. There were smiling faces in a collage across the top, none mine. Bold letters across the middle, celebrating generations, a Hoyt family milestone. Near the bottom, a line that punched harder than any insult. "This event is by invitation only. No list of past hosts. No in honor of those who made this possible." No photo of me on the heritage timeline, not even a name tag placeholder. I clicked print. The flyer came out clean and glossy. I laid it beside a stack of old reunion documents I kept in my desk. Newsletters, photos, even a t-shirt design I had drawn by hand for the 2001 event. I picked out a flyer from that year. My name in big font, organized with love by Daryl Hoyt. I stared at it, not angry, just still. Then I took a pen, circled my name in blue ink, folded it once, and slid it into a manila folder marked Archive, just like I had dozens of other keepsakes. The next day, I walked to the community lodge, the original one, the place where it had all started. I hadn't set foot there in years. The receptionist, a teenager with bright red earbuds and eyes on her phone, didn't look up when I said hello. When I mentioned I had hosted the first ever Hoyt family reunion there, she blinked at me like I was describing a folk tale. I wandered the halls. The carpet had changed. The lighting was newer, brighter, less forgiving, but I still saw echoes. Children running down those halls in paper crowns, cousins laughing too loudly at Uncle Ron's stories, my wife passing me a cup of lemonade with that sideways smile of hers. None of those moments had an invitation this year. As I stepped back outside, my phone buzzed. It was a photo, a group shot, all smiles, all teeth, Brant in the middle, arms raised. Hosted by Miles Jr. No caption, no tag, no trace of the man who once held the mic. Just the echo of footsteps leaving a building where his name no longer lived. The subject line of the email was innocuous enough. "Thought you'd want to see this." It came from Cousin Harold, who still signed every email with "Your favorite troublemaker." I clicked it open more out of habit than expectation. There it was, the latest digital flyer for the event. A high-gloss design with gold lettering and sharp angles. Del Vecchio Family Reunion, hosted and led by Miles Jr. Del Vecchio. That was our family's ancestral name, back before it was shortened to Hoyt by my grandfather at Ellis Island. Most folks didn't even know it, yet here it was, plastered across the top as if Brant had discovered it himself. The Founders section featured a full-sized photo of Brant, arms folded, business casual smile, standing in front of a vineyard I didn't recognize. Below it, carrying forward the tradition begun anew. No mention of me in the honorary legacy section. Not even a passing line, just an erasure with a digital sheen. I stood slowly, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled down a wooden box I hadn't opened in years. The tape across the lid was faded, the label peeling. Family events. Inside were stacks of programs, color copies of flyers, and even a few laminated name tags from past reunions. I pulled one program from 1998. My face was right there on the front, smiling wide in a candid shot. I looked younger, sun-warmed and proud, microphone in hand. Turning the pages, I found a speech I'd written, I used to print them out in 14-point font because my brother said anything smaller was rude to the older eyes. There were margins filled with notes in my late wife's handwriting. She had written a poem that year. I could still recite the opening lines. What makes us family is not just blood. It's how we show up when no one else does. Toward the bottom, in her elegant cursive, was a quote, "A name means nothing unless it's remembered kindly." I stared at that line longer than the rest. My thumb brushed over the ink, worn soft from time and folding. Her words stayed, even if the people didn't. A few hours later, Ivy forwarded me a draft of the program. She always tried to keep me in the loop in her quiet way, even when it wasn't her place. The file loaded slowly. When it did, the first thing I noticed was the line, "Opening blessing, delivered by Miles Jr., not Brant Miles Jr." Again, formal, chosen, public. In the old days, I was always the one to offer the blessing, not out of pride, but because they asked me to, because they said my voice carried something people trusted. Now, not even a footnote. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the flyer still in my hands. In my mind, I could hear myself 20 years ago, standing in front of the same lodge, calling out names like roll call, teasing cousins, honoring birthdays, making sure no one felt invisible. Those moments had weight once. I looked down at the program draft again, opened a blank email, started typing. "Brant, I noticed I'm not..." But my fingers hovered over the keyboard, then stopped, then hit backspace. Every word disappeared. Instead, I walked to the living room, folded the program into a triangle, and held it over the fireplace. I didn't rush it. The flame caught slowly, curling the edges, turning black before orange. I watched until the last ember winked out. That evening, I sat outside on the porch, listening to the frogs call back and forth under the hum of sprinklers. In the distance, someone lit early fireworks. Maybe a graduation party. Maybe just someone with a reason to celebrate. I watched the sparks rise and disappear. They had erased me. But I remembered everything. The afternoon sun sifted lazily through the treetops as I walked the familiar trail behind the community center. The path wound through a patch of pine and oak where the breeze smelled of damp mulch and memory. It was a route I took often, quiet, uneventful, the kind that helped a man keep his thoughts from knotting too tightly. Ahead, laughter, then voices. I recognized one immediately. Ivy's, warm and melodic even in casual conversation. The other, younger, belonged to her cousin Maddie. I slowed my pace, not to eavesdrop, just to listen. Something in their tone stopped me. "Are they really inviting him?" Maddie asked. "He just talks so much. It's embarrassing." A silence followed. Not awkward, intentional. Ivy didn't jump to defend me. Didn't say, "He's earned his place," or even a light. "He means well." She said nothing. I turned quietly and sat on the nearest bench, newspaper in hand, pretending to read. But the print blurred, unreadable behind a storm of thought. There's a particular ache that comes when your presence is reduced to a question mark, a debate topic. I had long accepted aging, the slowness, the forgetfulness, the ache in my knees that came with the rain, but being seen as a burden, or worse, a punchline, that was newer and sharper. When your name is spoken in whispers, I thought, you start to wonder if you're already a ghost. I stayed there a while, watching squirrels skitter across a fallen log, their urgency reminding me of childhood, of Brant running through these woods with a stick sword and superhero cape. He never worried about being too loud back then. Later that evening, back at home, the silence pressed against my ribs. The hallway photos, so proudly framed over the years, now looked like relics in a museum dedicated to someone no longer needed. Was I ever truly invited to those reunions? Or merely tolerated? A tradition, like the blessing before dinner, nice in theory, outdated in practice. I studied a photo from 2005, the year we held the reunion at Lake Murray. I was there, standing in the back row, smiling, holding the cake. But if someone glanced quickly, they'd think I was part of the catering crew. A few days later, I stopped by Brant's house to drop off a document. Nothing dramatic, just a form related to the family trust, something he'd asked for months ago. I didn't call ahead, didn't think I needed to. Jace answered the door. He was growing tall, 10 years old, maybe 11 now. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of me, and he turned to shout into the house. "Mom, someone's here for you!" A woman's voice responded from another room. "Who is it?" Jace hesitated, then said, loud and certain, "Some old guy." The words didn't hit like a slap. They hit like a quiet thud, a dropped book in an empty room. I stood there, hand on the envelope, watching my grandson not recognize me. Or worse, recognize me and choose that label instead. Nadine appeared, smiling like always. Polite? Too polite. "Oh, Daryl," she said, tone sweet but distant. "Brant's on a call. He might be tied up for a while." I nodded, handed her the envelope, and turned to leave. No fuss, no questions. Just steps down the porch I helped pay for, into the driveway that once held my truck more often than his. On the drive home, I stopped at a red light and pulled a notepad from the glove box. I scribbled something, crossed it out, rewrote it. No address, no plan to send it. "The worst kind of erasure isn't when they forget your name," I wrote. "It's when they remember and choose not to say it." When I got home, I tucked the note into the back cover of my Bible, somewhere between Proverbs and Revelation. It didn't need to be mailed. It just needed to be written. The email came late in the afternoon. I was sorting old receipts when I heard the familiar ping from my laptop. The subject line read, "Official itinerary, Hoyt reunion." It had been forwarded by my cousin Henry, who always said he hated technology but never failed to forward a good chain email. The document opened in full color, logos, bullet points, assigned seating charts, Brant's name at the bottom, beside Nadine's, both signed in sleek digital font. One line stood out, tucked near the bottom of the first page. "As we transition to a new generation of leadership, we thank all past contributors." That was it. No names, no details, just a general nod in the direction of whoever had come before. 12 words to erase a quarter-century of sweat and intention. Ivy came by that evening. She didn't say much at first, just sat at my kitchen table, watching steam rise from her mug of chamomile. "I saw the print version," she finally said. "The one they're handing out." She pulled a folded program from her bag and placed it gently on the table. I opened it. Near the back was a page titled Heritage Reflections. There, in the corner, was a cartoon, almost like something from a Sunday comic. A caricature of an elderly man, overly bald, hunched, eyes droopy, mouth drawn in a flat line. A name tag read, "The Founding Father." Underneath, a caption, "Once led, now honored by stepping aside." It was meant to be lighthearted, I'm sure, but they'd exaggerated the forehead, the slouch, even the way the man's trousers hiked too high. Everyone would know it was me. The joke wasn't just visual, it was personal. I didn't say anything, just folded the paper slowly and laid it aside like it might bite. Ivy studied my face. "Uncle D, I didn't know they were putting that in." "Who made it?" I asked, my voice more tired than angry. She hesitated. "Brant's marketing team." It was supposed to be a tribute, with humor. I nodded slowly. Humor usually requires warmth. The next day, I found myself standing outside Brant's office. It had been over a year since I'd last visited, back when he asked for help finalizing paperwork for his LLC. The plaque on the glass door read, Hoyt Group Events. Below it, smaller lettering, tradition with a modern twist. Nadine answered, always composed, always polite. "Daryl," she said with a tight smile, "Brant's tied up in a call. Maybe we could I'm not here for his schedule." She blinked, then stepped aside without another word. Inside, Brant stood from his desk, surprised but not startled. "Dad, I didn't know." I held up a hand. "You've made your statement, son, loud and clear." He opened his mouth, but I kept going. "But don't confuse silence with weakness. I'm old, not gone. He looked like he wanted to laugh, to smooth things over, to frame it all as misunderstanding. But the words never came. Just the faint buzz of his monitor behind him and the sound of his jaw tightening. I turned and left without waiting for a reply. That evening, I took the old reunion scrapbook down from the shelf in the den. It had traveled with me through 2 house moves and 3 decades. The spine was worn, corners curled. Inside were photos, programs, handwritten notes, a pressed flower or two, even a menu from the first reunion I ever hosted. I carried it out to the backyard fire pit. The night was quiet, just a whisper of wind and the low hum of distant traffic. I flipped through the pages one last time, pausing briefly at a yellowing note my wife had once tucked between the covers. They'll forget who started it, unless you remind them kindly. I closed the book. Then, page by page, I fed it to the flame. The memories didn't burn, but the paper did. The video arrived just after breakfast. A link from a cousin in Nebraska, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The subject line, "You're gonna love this tribute video." No context, just that. I clicked. It opened with swelling music and golden text. Hoyt Heritage, a legacy of unity. Then came the images. Black and white photos of ancestors in front of farmhouses, slow pans across reunion banners, kids in matching t-shirts playing lawn games. My eyes scanned each frame. But I wasn't in them, not once. They showed the lodge, the backyard where I hosted the first barbecue, even the prayer circle I'd led year after year. But no photo, no voice, no mention of me. Then, a familiar phrase hit my ears. One I had first scribbled into a reunion speech almost 2 decades ago. Family begins with remembering. But it wasn't my voice saying it. It was Brant's. And below it, in bold, Miles Brant Hoyt Jr. I hit pause, then rewind, then play again. Still him, still not me. I sat frozen, staring at the screen like it might apologize. Later that afternoon, I opened the folder Ivy had quietly shared with me. She'd created a link to a shared drive, a subtle rebellion I hadn't asked for but deeply appreciated. The folder held documents, spreadsheets, name lists, seating plans. One caught my eye. Dinner chart, finalized. I scrolled, no Daryl Hoyt. In my place, Mr. L. Ray, a distant in-law from Michigan I'd only met once, the man who wore sandals with socks and always asked about estate law over dessert. I printed the chart, took a red pen from my drawer, circled the table where my name should have been, and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. The red ring bled through the paper like a wound. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, Brant's voice still echoing. Family begins with remembering. I got up, made tea I didn't drink, pulled a journal from the shelf, one of many I'd kept over the years. It was from 2006, bound in cracked leather. Inside were notes from that year's reunion. Who grilled, who forgot to RSVP, what the weather had been like. And near the back, the quote, written in my own hand. I stared at it for a long time, then wrote across the page in bold capital letters, "Stolen." I ripped the page out, fed it to the small tin wastebasket under the desk, and struck a match. The flame curled the edges first, then swallowed the rest. By mid-morning, I found myself driving toward Greenfield Lodge. I hadn't been there since I signed the first rental agreement in '97. The gravel lot crunched under my tires the same way. Some things didn't change. Inside, I found Gunnar Frey, an old friend who now worked maintenance after retiring from carpentry. He looked older, but no less sharp. "Daryl," he said, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you. Thought you were stepping back this year?" I gave him a long look. Maybe I stepped back too far. He didn't pry. Outside, I lingered in the parking lot, engine off. A rental van was unloading banners, folding chairs, decorative signs. One banner unfurled momentarily in the wind, Brant's face smiling wide under the words, "New era, new energy." I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my banking app, pulled up the line item marked Hoyt Family Trust, Event Funding Transfer. It was still pending final release. I tapped the contact for our financial officer. When she answered, I kept my voice even. "Hi, Elaine. Can we review the sponsorship terms for this event?" Pause. Then her reply. "Of course, Mr. Hoyt. Would you like to schedule a hold or amendment?" "Yes," I said, watching the wind flip the banner sideways. "I believe an amendment is overdue." The booklet was small, glossy, and thick with pride. Ivy handed it to me carefully, like she was passing a folded flag. Her eyes said more than her mouth could, but she still tried. "I thought you should see it before it circulates," she whispered. The cover was tastefully done, gold foil lettering. A sepia-tinted photo of the lodge. Inside, photos and blurbs for each branch of the family, cute captions for the kids' pages, even a memorial spread for the ones we'd lost. Then came the dedication page. "Thanks to all supporters, especially Marcus Hoyt." I stared at that name, Marcus, like it might blink and become mine. It didn't. Ivy didn't say a word, but her hands twisted nervously in her lap. It was deliberate. There was no Marcus Hoyt in our family. Hadn't been in over 50 years. I wasn't misremembered. I was rewritten. Later that day, I dialed the number listed under the booklet's production contact, a company Brandt had outsourced most of the media work to. A young woman answered, chipper and smooth. "Hi, you've reached Modern Kin Publishing. This is Rhiannon. How can I help?" I told her who I was and asked, gently, why I had been excluded. There was a pause, followed by the sound of keyboard clicks. Then, "Oh, yes. We were instructed to keep the dedication language cohesive with the brand. Your video interview didn't quite match the tone we were aiming for." My voice stayed even. "What tone was that?" "Optimistic, forward-facing, clean," she replied. "Of course," I said, and hung up. I didn't need to argue. The insult was already paid in full. That night, I sat with my journal in my lap, pen in hand, words flowing not in anger, but certainty. You can polish over a crack, but it doesn't stop the house from falling. I closed the journal and looked out the window. I knew that the planning meeting was scheduled that night at the lodge, a dry run for speakers, table placement, lighting tests. I didn't go. Instead, I walked the trail that ran parallel to the back lot, where pine shadows spilled across the dirt like spilled ink. I watched from a distance as cars arrived. Laughter echoed faintly across the clearing. I stood behind the trees, a silent witness to my own exclusion. The next morning, I woke early, collected every document I'd kept, payment confirmations, emails, planning threads Ivy had given me access to. Every piece of proof that said, "You don't get to erase me and keep what I gave." I compiled them neatly into a binder. On top, I placed a handwritten note. If my name doesn't belong there, neither does my money. I sealed it in an envelope addressed to Brandt and drove it to his office. The receptionist looked surprised, but accepted it without question. I left without waiting for a response. That evening, in the quiet hum of the house, I wrote a second letter. No address, no envelope, just ink and weight. There's a cruelty in exclusion that only the included pretend not to feel. I folded it once and tucked it behind the photo of my wife on the mantel. Her eyes smiled back at me from 1973, her hand resting on my shoulder. She'd understand. 7 days before the reunion, I arrived at the lodge without ceremony, wearing a plain navy windbreaker and holding nothing but a folder under one arm. The parking lot buzzed with activity, trucks unloading tables, staff stringing up lights between the old oaks. I walked in through the side gate, heading for the main entrance, where a check-in table had been set up. A young woman, clipboard in hand, looked up. "Are you with the catering team, sir?" I stared at her, blinked once, then reached into my folder and handed her the sealed envelope. No reply, no clarification. I just turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard her call after me. "Wait, do you need a pass?" But I didn't stop. I didn't need a pass. The envelope I handed over contained 3 things. First, a bank transfer receipt, clearly marked Hoyt Family Trust, reunion sponsorship, $12,000. Second, a printed email thread. Dr. Brandt's name all over it. Subject line, rebranding the event, minimizing legacy focus. Beneath it, his comments. Make sure it feels fresh. Old voices tend to derail the message. Third, a handwritten note on heavy cream paper. Legacy without gratitude is theft with a smile. The receptionist placed the envelope on the corner of her desk, where it remained for the better part of the day. It wasn't until evening that she mentioned it to Brandt's assistant in passing. Someone dropped this off. Looked official. Brandt opened it alone in his office after everyone had gone. Nadine stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. Her lips tightened. "That's direct," she said flatly. He didn't respond, but his face changed. Not a flicker of guilt, just the flicker of being caught. By the following morning, something unexpected happened. A grainy photocopy of the documents appeared on Ivy's desk. No note, no sender. She recognized the handwriting on the note immediately. She shared it with her cousin Monroe, who worked on the logistics team. Within a day, copies circulated quietly, slipped into planning folders, left beside sign-in sheets, stuffed into coffee break trays. No one said anything aloud, but eyes met differently in passing. In the private family group thread, a message popped up. "Did you see this?" Another replied, "That's low, even for Brandt." No one mentioned my name, but the silence was no longer solid. It had cracks now, hairline fractures that let in the truth. As for me, I didn't show up at the final planning meeting, nor did I respond to the sudden voicemail from Brandt's office asking if I wanted to have a quick conversation to clear up any confusion. Instead, I drove out to the old campgrounds where we held the very first reunion. The grounds had changed, the fire pit replaced with a playground, the benches newly painted, but the air still smelled like pine and charcoal and something simple. I sat at the same bench I had 25 years ago, pulled out the current event brochure from my pocket, scanned it like a man reading a history he didn't write, but whose fingerprints were still all over the page. Then I smiled, not bitterly, not sadly, just knowingly. "They tried to write me out," I whispered, "but I wrote first." The television flickered softly in the corner of the room, its light pooling across the hardwood floor. I sat with a cup of lukewarm tea, the kind I'd forgotten I'd made until it was too late to reheat. The local news was winding down, and just as I reached for the remote, the anchor smiled and said, "Coming up next, a look at one local family's multi-generational legacy." I paused. There, on screen, was Brandt. He stood in front of the community center, backlit by the setup crews, smiling like a man who had earned every accolade being handed to him. "This reunion," he said smoothly, "is about honoring the family vision we built together. It's never been about one person, it's about legacy." I leaned forward. That phrase, the family vision we built, it was mine. I'd used it in a keynote speech 12 years ago, back when the kids still played kickball on the lawn and no one dared call me by the wrong name. The camera panned to a banner fluttering behind him. Brandt's face, again. The remote stayed in my lap. Instead, I let the quiet settle around me. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated on the side table. Then again, and again. Messages came in. Names I hadn't seen in months. Old cousins, family friends, college roommates from decades past. "Why weren't you at the interview?" "So proud of what you started, Daryl. They quoted you." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the messages one by one, screenshotting each, a digital archive of applause that never quite reached me. That night, another ping hit my inbox. This one more official, an automated thank you note from the reunion committee. It was a mass message, clearly, but what caught me was the salutation. "Dear Mr. Douglas Hoyt." Douglas had been my cousin. He died in 1993. I stared at the email for a long time, wondering if I should reply, correct them, remind them who was still alive. I didn't. Some errors aren't accidents, they're erasures. 2 days later, Ivy knocked on my front door. She held an envelope, crisp white, sealed with a gold sticker. Inside was a printed version of the event roster. She didn't need to say anything. I read between the names. Near the top, bolded and centered, was Brant. No mention of sponsors, no mention of founders, no footnotes, no dedications. Just a clean, curated list that might as well have been fiction. "There's a lot of talk behind closed doors," Ivy said finally. "Some are starting to ask questions, like, how much of this Brant actually did?" I folded the paper and set it on the table beside us. "They'll see soon enough," I said. She nodded, uncertain whether that was comfort or a warning. That evening, I checked one of the more private family group chats, the one the younger cousins used. Normally, a hive of gifs and jokes and plans about who was bringing which dessert, but this time, it was different. Screenshots had appeared there. Someone had posted financial records, proof of sponsorship, a note with my handwriting, no name attached to the upload. The group chat had gone quiet for nearly 4 hours. Unheard of. When it revived, the tone had shifted. No more Brant-centered promotions. No more meme posters about new era, new energy. Instead, messages like, "Let's make sure this reunion honors everyone, past and present." Time to remember where this started. I didn't ask who sent the screenshots. I already knew. The morning before the reunion, I sat at my desk with the blinds half drawn, a thin slice of South Carolina light cutting across the floor. In front of me lay a folder, its edges softened by time but its contents still sharp. I opened it. Inside were the founding documents for the Hoyt Legacy Fund. My signature on the bottom of each page, penned in thick black ink 20 years ago. It had started as a modest endowment, just enough to pay for venue rentals and emergency travel. But over time, it had grown. Quietly, reliably, like me. I picked up the phone and dialed Marcus Chen, the family's former legal advisor. He picked up on the second ring. "Marcus," I said, skipping pleasantries. "I want the trust frozen until proper acknowledgement is restored." There was a pause. "You sure about this, Daryl?" "As sure as I've ever been." And just like that, the wheels turned. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. The family plot sat on a gentle hill, shaded by oaks. I'd visited often, more than anyone else, and maintained it quietly. Trimmed the hedges, replaced worn flags, brushed the leaves off old stones. Today, I wasn't there to mourn. I stopped by the caretaker's office and handed him an envelope. "Would you make sure Ivy Lemire receives this?" He nodded, tipping his cap. Inside the envelope was a notarized letter, the full transfer of management rights over the Hoyt Historical Archive and cemetery oversight. Ivy had earned that right, with her silence, her questions, her truthfulness. That evening, she called. "They tried to rename the fund," she said, her voice tight. "Miles Legacy Circle." Brant's middle name. His middle name? Ivy had stopped it. Used the authority I'd handed her just hours earlier to block the change mid-process. That action, a single administrative log, sent a quiet but resounding wave through the reunion committee. By sundown, whispers turned to messages. Group chats lit up again. Why was the name changed? Was Daryl even consulted? He built the fund, I remember. He signed my aunt's travel check himself in '09. Then the screenshots emerged, draft flyers with Brant's branding, email headers from his assistant, the words "New Era" repeated like a slogan. That night, I sat with my tea, no longer lukewarm. I didn't receive a call, not from Brant, not from Nadine, no apology, no backpedaling. But the website quietly updated. The name returned to Hoyt Heritage Trust. The legacy page refreshed. My picture now placed at the top corner. No announcement, no caption, just restored. I leaned back and smiled. They fixed the plaque, but they never rang the bell. The sun hung low over Greenville, casting long shadows that stretched across the sidewalk as I walked past the lodge. My steps were slow, deliberate, not from age, but from intention. I wasn't here to attend, just to see. On the lawn, I could hear laughter, the kind that used to belong to us all, back when the family felt like a net rather than a web. I didn't pause near the entrance, but Gunnar Frey, old friend turned part-time security, stood by the gate, arms crossed and sunglasses perched just above his furrowed brow. He spotted me, glanced around quickly, then opened the gate a sliver. "Sir," he said, voice low, respectful, "they may not know it, but I remember who started all this." I nodded once. That was enough. I kept walking until I reached the park bench across the street. Same one I used to sit on with my wife during the early reunions. Back then, we'd laugh at how overdressed everyone was, or how Uncle Ben always brought that lumpy potato salad no one touched. I sipped coffee from a thermos I'd filled hours ago. Still warm, just enough. Across the way, kids played tag between tables. Adults milled about in color-coordinated shirts stamped with a new logo I didn't recognize. Someone started music through a rented sound system. Ivy emerged near the lodge steps. Her eyes scanned briefly until they landed on me. She didn't wave big, just a small gesture, almost like brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. No one else saw, but she did, and she made sure I knew. Time slowed in moments like that. There are shifts you don't realize until you're on the outside. The thing about being forgotten is, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually, and then one day, you're across the street watching your name be scrubbed off a banner. You can only chase legacy so long before realizing, if no one hands it to you, you were carrying it the whole time. I thought of the first reunion, the rented tables I set up in the heat, the BBQ we grilled ourselves, the folding chairs from the church that creaked under the weight of good stories and full stomachs. Flashbacks come like old songs, familiar, slightly worn. Now I sat watching from afar, present but removed, visible but ghosted. Later that evening, the sky had turned soft lavender when Ivy walked up the church courtyard path where I'd wandered after the crowd inside grew too loud to ignore. She sat beside me without a word. Fireworks from the lodge cracked faintly in the background. Celebration for a legacy, edited and rebranded. "They didn't say your name," she said softly, "but I said it in every room I walked into today." I looked at her, this granddaughter who had seen what others refused to. "That's enough," I said, and I meant it. Later, at home, I placed the thermos in the sink and turned on the classical station. The violins hummed low, steady, like memory itself. I sat beside the photo of my wife on the mantel, her smile frozen in that timeless way only photographs can manage. "They won't remember this day the way I will," I whispered to her. "And that's okay." I leaned back in my chair, let the music wash over the room, and finally closed my eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from release. Monday morning brought a soft drizzle over Greenville. The kind of rain that didn't soak you, just lingered in the air long enough to remind you the seasons were turning again. I walked into Harold's Cafe, same booth by the window, same waitress who always brought me black coffee before I even ordered. But something had shifted. The regulars looked up as I passed, not the usual quick nods or polite hellos. These were longer looks, quieter acknowledgments, the kind folks give not just to someone they recognize, but to someone they've just begun to understand. A man I barely knew from church leaned over as I passed his table. "We heard what really happened," he said softly. "You did more than they'll ever know." I gave him a smile, a small one. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. There was no need. Back home, the phone rang just after lunch. Marcus Chen, as punctual as always. "It's done," he said. "The property transfer is finalized. Ivy now has full custodianship of the archive and cemetery trust." "And Brant's house?" I asked, though I already knew. "You're no longer tied to it in any form," he confirmed. "Your name's on one deed now, just the house you live in." I nodded to myself. "The rest," I murmured, "they'll have to build without me." Later that evening, Ivy came by. She didn't stay long, just long enough to hand me a framed photo of my wife, the one from our 25th anniversary reunion. She'd had it restored, cleaned of dust and time. "They hung it in the archive," she said, her voice low, right above the dedication plaque. I looked down at the frame, my wife's eyes still as kind as I remembered. Ivy leaned in close. "I saw you there, Grandpa," she whispered. even when they didn't. The tear came before I could stop it, not from sorrow, from the quiet relief of being seen again. That night, I started packing, not out of exile, renewal. The truck sat waiting in the driveway. Inside, a carefully folded road map, a suitcase with just enough, and one leather-bound journal labeled simply, "What I kept," the old family crest. That ornate thing we used to print on banners and programs, I wrapped in cloth and placed gently in the attic. It didn't belong to me anymore, but this next part, this road ahead, it did. The next morning, I drove past the lodge one last time. No banners remained, no voices, just the breeze through empty picnic tables. Then the road opened up, south toward the coast, through sleepy towns and roadside diners. I stopped to watch old boats dock in Beaufort, wandered through a museum in Savannah, sat under moss-draped oaks in Charleston. At every place, I pulled Ivy's note from my coat pocket, reread it. "Don't let them take your name, Grandpa. You built this. Now build something for yourself." And so I did. Sometimes justice isn't a gavel. It's silence you control. Sometimes power isn't reclaiming your seat. It's choosing to stand up and walk away. And sometimes being written out is how you start writing what truly matters. As the sun dipped low behind me, I watched it in the side mirror. Greenville growing smaller, quieter. Ahead, just road. And finally, peace.